Hi everybody, welcome to today's session about mental health and an international problem. Estimates suggest that sort of between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 people suffer with a mental health problem every year in countries like the US and the UK. And I've seen various estimates of the cost of mental health problems worldwide between $1 trillion and $2.5 trillion per year. Coverage and help for people with mental health problems is very, very patchy around the world. Even the countries like the UK, which supposedly have a good healthcare system, people struggle to get the help they need. And I've seen suggestions that in some low-income countries, up to 75% of people just can't get any help. So really interested to see the views of the panel and different views from different cultures and countries. So I'm going to start by just introducing letting the panel introduce themselves rather, and then we'll get on with some discussion. So if I start with you, Sari, if you just give us an introduction to yourself, thanks.
Oh, hello everyone. Yes, my name is Sari. Accent is not local. I am originally from Finland. I have lived in the UK now for 27 years. The accent never goes away. I have a company called Muutos. We call ourselves a one-stop shop service for companies who want to improve their employee well-being and mental health, and of course productivity and retention, and also talent attraction. In the center of the whole service is the aim to help companies create a kind of truly human-centric company culture. And what does it mean? It basically just means that, we start understanding what we humans are and how we function, and what brings well-being and what creates stress, anxiety, and depression. And we tap into human fundamentals, which are surprisingly simple. And we're basically using that understanding. We help companies to create an environment where people are happy and people are well, and they can actually do the best job possible. So we do education. That's the heart of everything, educating not only just the leaders and managers, but also the employees themselves, helping them to start improving their own mental well-being and performance. And we have a number of tools which we use where we can measure the well-being, and then we help companies change the situation. So it's a kind of a quite large and wide service provision that we have, but that's what we do.
Thanks, Sari. Can we move on to you, Taffy? Give us a brief introduction to yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm Taffy Mazikana, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vimbo Health. My past background is in banking and finance in the UK. And I got into the space after being treated for my own severe anxiety and depression through a digital platform that was made available to me by the very, very generous UK National Health Service. And from there became an advocate for mental health, reducing stigma, and eventually coming to see how we can make digital platforms available to people, primarily in Africa, where of course access is a greater issue. But of course, we are all humans, so what we do is going to be beneficial outside of Africa as well. But that is our focus from a point of view of the impact we want to have initially. So yeah, that's who I am, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Taffy. George.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all, and I'm delighted to be part of this international panel. I'm excited to bring my perspective as much as to learn about these different perspectives from around the world. I am the co-founder and director of OnSong. My background is in the arts and cultural sector, but I've been lucky enough to be a musician my whole life. And we formed OnSong 6 or 7 years ago as a framework to share the benefits of music to a business audience primarily. We were set up to take what we knew to be the incredible psychological and physiological benefits of music to an audience who we felt really could benefit from this. And it's fair to say it's been a real journey. We've got facilitators, performers all around the country who go into offices and they lead people in song to experience the benefits. And yeah, there's been a lot of learning along the way. We do a lot of advocacy, thinking about preventative well-being more broadly, and thinking about the qualitative, quantitative data that can demonstrate the benefit of these kind of preventative, proactive approaches, and can help businesses to take these on to support their practices going forward. So that's a little bit about who I am, where we come from.
Brilliant, thanks George. And Pete?
Hi, yeah, thank you Kate. Pete Allison. I run a company called County Business Shows, and we put on business conferences and events and showcases, and actually this discussion that we're taking part of is one of the ones we're doing under the Business Insights brand, and thank you all for taking part. My background, originally in the technical side of the music and arts business. I was lighting designer and production manager in festivals and touring shows and the like. The last 10 years or so, we've been working with the business community to create these conversations and discussions to actually start looking at areas that the business world is looking at. And it's been interesting since we've been doing it in a live context since 2015. We've seen a progression of discussion of things that are relevant at the time. And of course, this has just been an incredibly difficult year for so many different reasons, but across the globe. And there are a number of things that have come to the fore in recent times, and especially over the last year, but mental health is absolutely up there. And we've seen that from a UK culture. We have the luxury, if you like, by in doing these events that we do quite a bit in the regions of Gloucestershire and South Gloucestershire and North Somerset. But with Business Insights and with the ability to use the internet in a way that we've all got to use it, even more so in the last year, we've got a lot of international partners. And of course, this, as Taffy said a moment ago, we're all humans. You know, there's no exception. But of course, the cultures are different. The circumstances are different. So it's a really interesting discussion I think we're about to have about, you know, from our perspective in the UK is great. But how does that cross over with the perspectives that are going on internationally? So thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Pete. I'll just briefly introduce myself as well. So I'm Kay Hamblin from a company called 8 Legal. We provide down-to-earth employment law and HR support to other businesses, and also consultancy in areas around things like team development, resilience and business culture. So that's me. So moving on, we're going to start with a really huge, broad question. And really it's, you know, why do you think that there are such huge problems with mental health globally at the moment? And do you think there are lessons that we can learn from different cultures and their approaches to mental well-being? So I'm going to start with you, Sari, because I know you've got quite broad experience in this area. So over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, rather. Yes, where to start even? I always like to tell a bit of a story when we think about human beings. So if we think about us human beings, you know, we are the result of evolution, which has been going on for millions of years and tens of thousands of years. And that evolution, in order for us humans to survive, it has kind of created these innate survival needs in us. So every single human being who is born, you know, comes to this world with a set of genetically programmed survival needs, and they are physical needs and they are also psychological needs for us humans. And basically, when the whole aim of life is to survive, and our brain's main function is to keep us alive. The brain's main function is to enable us to get our survival needs met. When we get our survival needs met, we are well. All is kind of well. And of course, that programming, you know, what we humans are made of, that hasn't changed for tens of thousands of years, definitely for us humans. And any changes to our survival mechanisms, you know, they take awfully long time to change. And so we are basically the same creatures we were, you know, our ancestors were, our families were, or we can go back, you know, many millennia, thousands of years. What has been happening recently is that our life and our society and the way we work, it has been changing much faster than we can adjust as human beings. If we think about, you know, the life, work, society has been changing quite subtly over many hundreds of years and thousands of years. And because those changes have been so slow, we humans have been able to adjust to those changes somewhat. But now, if we think about the past 10 years, when the whole technological revolution started to come about, when our whole life, our communication, our social life, everything has changed. And especially if we think about the COVID, you know, in how drastically our life has changed in the past 18 months. There is no way we humans have been able to adjust to any of that. And especially if we don't understand that what brings the healthy mind and mental health and well-being, if we don't understand what enables us to be healthy, it's difficult to understand what makes us unhealthy. But because we haven't had that knowledge, we have been totally puzzled because everything has changed around us, but we haven't changed anything, you know, the way how we actually live, how we cope. And we have been in a total limbo, all of us. So those sources where we got our human needs met from the variety of sources, from our families, from our hobbies, from our workplaces, our colleagues, they all disappeared, and we didn't have any substitutions kind of for them. So we haven't been getting our human needs met, and that's why we have all been so unwell. So the brain, when the brain detects that it's not getting the survival needs met, it reacts. That's its job. It reacts by reducing the fight or flight, or kind of kicking off the fight or flight inside our brain and our body, and it has also consequences to us. And that's, we have been all running in that state, and we have been also unwell. And to me, it's very kind of, it's no brainer why we are all getting so unwell, because the life has changed so drastically that we don't get what we need as human beings. And the same has been happening all over the world. So of course, it's a universal, it's a global problem, you know, this decline in our mental health and well-being. And even if it sounds very disheartening in a way, but it's not, because once we start understanding what brings that well-being, we can start finding the new sources which got to start bringing that. They start bringing those human needs back into our lives. I hope it makes sense. I never can say anything in a short and sweet way, but for me, it's absolutely fundamental that we understand that we have these needs. We need to get them met. If we don't get them met, how can we start getting them met again? If it makes sense. I hope it does. Sorry, it took so long time.
Not at all, sorry. No, thank you. I mean, it's basically physiologically we still respond to, so the stress we're suffering is chronic, but our bodies respond to it as if we're being attacked by a tiger, basically, is what it comes down to, I think, isn't it? So physiologically, we just haven't changed, even though our environment is just so different. No, thanks for that. Taffy, can I move on to you, please?
Yeah, sure. No, that was really great by Sari, and I think really touched on amazing points, and especially that greater need in what is a different environment. I think part of the problem that we have there is there is that greater need, but also at the same time, the infrastructure hasn't changed. So on the one hand, there's a different environment and we haven't changed. And on the other hand, there's also a greater need, but the means of dealing with the topic, not just in terms of infrastructure, but societally, haven't adapted as fast as the need has appeared. And if we look at just the topic of, I guess, sheer neglect of how we consider mental health still, even now, with the level of awareness, there still isn't that appreciation of it being on a par with physical health. And until that's the case, there's unfortunately, I think, still going to be a lot of difficulties that are faced. And just looking not a difficult reach, but a near reach to the situation of Naomi Osaka that came out. I guess that's a big talking point in our mental health space recently. We would think that in that environment, people would be very open and very aware that it's an important topic. But as we saw there, the reaction to her stepping out from this tournament because she had mental health difficulties was to fine her. Whereas if she said, I'm bleeding profusely and I can't stop the bleeding, therefore I can't go to this press conference, it would have been a different result. So there's still a lot of work to do in terms of how we think about it and starting to say, okay, great, we have all of this awareness. What are we actually going to do about it from a point of view of the infrastructure?
I think it's such an important point about the way we, you know, if somebody's got a broken leg, we expect them to get it fixed. But if they're struggling mentally, there's this sort of feeling that they're just meant to get over themselves almost. So I think that still is an attitude that we come across, don't we? No, thanks for that, Taffy. George.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of really good responses there. Really kind of setting the scene for this conversation, I think. I was reflecting on what Sari said about thinking about kind of how our working practices have accelerated and how they've hugely outpaced our ability kind of biologically to cope. And then throw into that the amount of technology that's been throwing it. Already pre-COVID, there was a huge amount of talk about people being tech saturated and how that was a kind of a real driver of mental health issues. And you know, one of the reasons why things have been able to continue as they have over the last 18 months is because we've had so much tech, and we've gone from kind of it being a part of our lives to it being an absolutely central component. It is the only way that we are able to communicate with our teams, and we're still able to have these conversations. So I think that has been a real driver recently that has been experienced, you know, absolutely across the board. And obviously mental health has been affected similarly in all cultures by this. This is the first time that we've had, you know, COVID's the first time that the news has come into everybody's house in the world. You know, since going back 50, 60 years, you know, it's the first time that we are all impacted in the same way. And I was just thinking about our journey, you know, beginning 5 or 6 years ago, when mental health was talked about kind of a lot less. It kind of felt like more of a niche, more of a bolt-on. But different organizations are at different stages in their mental health journey. And different cultures and different societies and different attitudes in workplaces are also at different places in their mental health journey. And that's something I think we'll probably unpack as we go along today. But you know, it's as much thinking about the different attitudes of the culture and the society, but also the leadership who are going to be implementing these things. But then the kind of internal organizational cultures that mean that people are actually engaging with the initiatives that are open to them. You know, and a lot of the time, that's the thing which is not thought about. You know, it's like we secure some budget, cool, we've got the buy-in from the leadership, cool, implement the thing, wash our hands with it, done. And then 6 people turn up, and then there's zero impact at all. And so, thinking about how we can embed these things in a way which gets the buy-in from the top, gets the budget, and then is able to actually make some impact from getting some real engagement from the people who are really needing it.
That's a really good point, actually, about, yeah, it's not one size fits all, is it? It's different things for different situations, and you need to actually be thinking about it rather than just somebody on high going, oh, this is what we need. I think it's got to be a bit more holistic than that. Thanks, George. Pete?
Yeah, it's really interesting listening to everybody's inputs. And I think there's a couple of things strike me as I'm hearing what people say. First of all, I mean, there's no question, it's an obvious statement, but this is a really complex issue, and there are a lot of very, very complex underlying trends. I think one thing that does always strike me in these conversations is it's really important to understand that mental health mental health problems have not just arrived with us in the last year, 2 years, 10 years. You know, if we cast our minds back, you know, a couple of decades in the 50s and 60s and slum housing and problems with employment and the depression of the 1920s and 2 world wars, and this is all looking from a very UK-based culture. If we look around the international picture now and you look at Syria and you look at all the strife that's going on, mental health, of course, is a core factor in any population in experiencing any of those things, and it always has been. What's changing and what is creating the conversation that we're having now is the awareness of the mental health issues, and hopefully, I think, a desire to pick those up. That awareness itself is created in part by the very digital processes and communications that we've introduced. Speed of communication, digital communication has become vastly fast. If you go back just a couple of decades, if you had a village in the middle of Yorkshire or any part of the world, It would be a community. It would exist. There would be a lot of people who might never venture outside the village. They would have the support networks. It would be a very human-driven and human-centered existence. And relating back to, Sarah's points about, evolution, that's how the human condition developed. If you look at that same notional village in Yorkshire today, it's very transitory. The digital communication world has arrived. Someone in that Yorkshire village is aware of what's happening in, Johannesburg or Syria or Northern Ireland or wherever it is within literally milliseconds of the occurrence. So the awareness is vast, and suddenly individuals are trying to take on huge amounts of thinking space that they can't control. So therefore you end this sort of slightly frustrating space saying, the world's all just fallen over. Well, it hasn't just fallen over. You've just become aware that it's fallen over, and suddenly you're seeing it right in front of you and right now. Those of us who are of, should we say, a certain age, a little bit older, a bit of life experience under our belts, whatever you think about it, can assimilate that and can look at it and go, yeah, okay, yeah, not great. However, we can't cure the whole world in one move. What am I doing at the moment? What the really concerning area that I see, and I think we see coming out, is the younger generations, those who necessarily don't have the life experience and are affected very immediately by a digital culture that's going around them. 1 second they can be comparing shoes in a fashion store or online or something, and the next they're worrying about some disaster that's going on the other side of the world. How do, without the life experience but with the full exposure to digital, how can we help? How can we manage the process of mental health development, mental development that creates the health? It's a bit like asking a toddler to run a marathon and just saying, no, you've got to run a marathon now. Come on, the marathon's going on, we're running. The toddler is not capable of running the marathon. The toddler has to grow up and do some training and then learn how to run the marathon. But we don't carry that back through to the world of digital comms that we're introducing at a breakneck pace. Now, the upside of that is, of course, digital comms are a great tool, as we've heard as well, to be able to facilitate things. And it's just a very tricky thing about how we cross over cultures, how we cross over both the culture internally in a given country about what people have different cultural positions, but also as we look across the cultures widespread across the world, how we get the comms working and in an appropriate way that people don't get run over by the train as it's coming down the line. I think that would be my opener for 10.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, I think it is the sheer pace of change, isn't it, that has floored a lot of people. And although, I mean, I've got 2 daughters who are very much, they've grown up in the digital age, and because they're so competent at it, then it's easy not to realise or not to understand some of the challenges that brings with it, even for the people who are very competent at it. Folks like us, Peter, have had to kind of adapt and get used to it. So, I mean, moving on, we've touched a little bit already on the impact of COVID. I mean, it's clearly had a huge impact on mental health and well-being. I just wonder if you think there are the specific things that it has changed, and do you think there are lessons that we can learn from it? I mean, one of the things that I'm very conscious of is just how uneven the impact has been. So, we've had some people who've been very comfortable working from home, everything's been a nice setup. Then you've got a whole swathe of people who can't work from home. They might be driving a bus or working in a shop, and they've had to go out and face the risk of contracting COVID, and people's anxieties have been around different things, I think. I know we've dealt with businesses who have been furloughing workers, and we've had one batch of workers who've been saying, furlough me, I don't want to go to work. And other people who perhaps you would consider to be vulnerable, who should be furloughed, were saying, no, I want to be in work. And everybody's experience has been very different. But I think most people have had some anxieties at some stage. And I just wonder if you think there are lessons we can take away from COVID. So I'm going to go backwards this time, Pete, and start with you.
Well, yeah, we sort of find ourselves in a space that you can box up and call human resilience. And I think again, there isn't a one answer fits all. There isn't going to be. It would be a very boring human race if there was. And actually, there's some of the things we see. I mean, I work in the world of live events, and I've got a lot of colleagues who stopped what they were doing business-wise about a year and a half ago and are still only working out how to get that back up again. And within that subsection, you've got some who've kind of gone, oh dear, and that's been the end of that, or others who've got up and dusted themselves down and said, okay, so it's not working this way, so how do we do this survival thing, you know? And that I think represents itself across workforces. I mean, I know of an office in Cheltenham where they furloughed 90% of their staff. Sorry, they didn't. They furloughed 5% of their staff and had kept 95% working, but sent them to work from home, insurance-related business. And they came to start thinking about getting people back in, and people were just not wanting to come back into the work. And a lot of that was due to, and they were seeing very low productivity. So you're getting the mental switch down. And we see a lot of situations going on in the live events industry where people they've got out of the methodology and out of the process of just communicating. I was listening to a really interesting piece the other day where the issue that is dressed up, that's using subjective language, but it's presenting itself as I'm nervous to go out because of COVID, but actually, is it that, or am I nervous to go out because I've sort of forgotten how to deal with people and how to deal with the world? And that's a whole different thing, and it's right into this mental health space, and it's a very concerning thing, because if we don't as a society sort of face that and actually embrace it again, and that's not just the people who will ultimately go, okay, yeah, fine, and take a week or two, but they're fine. There are the whole other section of society who have stopped and really will find it difficult to get going again. And how do we support that group of people? I don't know, and it's a governmental and a societal thing, but that's certainly something that COVID has created as an issue.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting as well. I mean, sort of working from home has been great for some people, but going back to some of what Sarah was saying earlier, you know, that loss of connection and those just the informal moments at work where you have the chat and the ideas spring up and you might reach out if you're struggling a bit. I think that has all become a bit more difficult when people are working remotely, for a lot of people anyway. George, can I have your thought?
Sure. So, I mean, I think just to start with, obviously, it's obvious to say, but the impact on mental health and well-being of employees has not been a positive one. You know, there's the sense of isolation, the sense of the being unsure about where it's going, not having that kind of ground on which to base yourself. You know, workloads have gone up because the number of jobs have gone down. You know, people are, but also the working practices of working from home have been you know, damaging. You know, I was reading a report last night about the average working week has increased by up to 25%. Because people are because there's this sense of being always on. There's always this always on culture that comes out. You know, shorter lunch breaks. I was talking to someone the other day who said that the best piece of advice they had was, even when you're working from home, still commute to work. So even if you're going to work from home, go for a walk around the block, and then get to work. And then the same at the end of the day. The amount of information that we have to process during the day, especially when we have a day when we're not taking very many lunch breaks, when we've got absolutely tech overload, the amount that we are holding in our head, you know, it's like a pressure cooker. And you know, getting on the tube, listening to music, going for a walk at the end of the day was a very good way of allowing yourself to process all of that. And so I think finding that space is still really important. But I think the kind of the zoom out from that is that you know, whereas well-being and mental health was certainly on the agenda of businesses, it's now, the impact has been that now it is inescapably on you know, we saw that the Deloitte report from the beginning of 2020 talked about the cost to UK employers was 45 billion, and well, yeah, we had to see the exact figures of what it plays out. from COVID, but it's going to have increased considerably, and that's not something that leaders can ignore. And I was just thinking about what that looks like in terms of a culture shift, in terms of how inescapably that has to happen. And I was reflecting on an article I read a while ago, thinking about environmental and social governance and how that has kind of changed over the way that businesses approached. And the example was Al Gore in 2004. I got together with a group of financial professionals and set up a kind of investment management that was all about long-term focus on investing in sustainability. And it was viewed with a degree of skepticism. And then fast forward to present day, and the environmental agenda has shifted. The cultural shift around the environmental agenda has shifted so much. And that's the E in ESG, and the S, the social, is we are experiencing that right now. We're going through this period where in a few years' time, we won't even be asking these questions, because leaders will have to have embedded these thinkings and these practices from the top. And I think it's interesting to really be part of that movement and to see it in action in the same way that we have seen and we are seeing ongoing in the environmental movement. And I suppose, yeah, just the final thing on that is that what that means is that a lot of the Gen Z, a lot of the new entrants to the job market, they are looking to organizations to have strong mental health and wellbeing policies in place. And that will increasingly become an ability to attract and retain top talent will be about thinking about these things. So the play out will be, going from this idea of it just being a kind of nice to have, as was said a few years ago, to something which is a vital part of way businesses operate.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because attitudes are definitely changing, and what people are looking for from work is changing. And I think possibly the pandemic has accelerated that for a lot of people. I think it's made people stop and think about what's really important and what they really want from their life and their work, I think. Right, Taffy, we're really interested to hear the perspective from a different continent.
Yeah, no, amazing points made there. And I'll just provide maybe a wraparound of just sort of some of what I took from some of the other participants as well. So I'm a big believer in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the therapy that I went through that brought me into this space and advocacy, and it's what we aim to deliver through our mobile platform. It's based on that evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy principles. And in CBT, one of the key things that we teach there is that your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors are all interlinked, and changing one changes the others. And when we look at the behaviors aspect of it, when I look back in my life, there have been, I'll call it an event, but it's probably a prolonged item or interaction that I felt like I came out of that different from how I was when I went in. And if I look at an example of when I did my first startup, with all the wrong behaviors of what an entrepreneur should be, because I viewed an entrepreneur as someone who is unflappable, who is inflammable, indestructible, and that was the model of an entrepreneur. And I adopted behaviors that, unknown to me at that time, changed me. And I would say I would have identified myself as coming out of that experience different from how I went in. And I think very much what we find with COVID is that on a mass scale, the behaviors of a lot of people have been changed for a prolonged period of time and in a very deep way. And so there's going to be that need to step back and say, what impact is that having and how are people coming out of this? Because on a mass scale, people will be coming out of this different from how they went in. Just the topics noted here in terms of isolation, and also the immediate loss of coping mechanisms, etc. But also we have to think about it in terms of what positive behaviors have been adopted in this time, and really taking a step back and saying, from my point of view, I see a lot of people who are in my social networks who never had any interest in walking or running or hiking, suddenly taking these up as core interests and saying, that's fantastic. Let's encourage more of that. But also, to Pete's point, social interaction is still important. Yes, we're now very familiar with Zoom, which we didn't really know of before. I mean, Zoom had 10 million users per day in December 2019, and that shot up to 300 million in April 2020. So that's something that's obviously now with us, and we need to just monitor that behavior. And I think employers also have to be conscious of that, to say, okay, fine, this is a new behavior that might have an impact from a point of view of people's willingness and ability to interact. And so the future of work is going to be very interesting in terms of how you navigate this in order to keep good behaviors, but also balance with addressing some of the, I think, harmful side effects that might occur. But overall, I would say a lot of warning signs, but we just have to be conscious of that there's some positives as well.
I think it's really interesting how sort of Zoom and electronic communication has both we've lost a lot of the direct communication, but in some ways it's broadened our horizons and broadened our reach, and the very fact that we're sat here on this call now is evidence of that. So I think it is important, as you say, to see that there are some good things in it, and we need to try and retain the good and yeah, not lose everything. Sorry.
Thank you, everyone. So many things. I was trying to note things down because I always forget what people have said, but something what I noted out from the previous conversation, and it was this technology. And I think, we are human beings. We are meant to live with human beings. We are meant to live in a human society. Our brain has evolved to connect with other human brains. And we have senses for reasons, all our senses. The technology is an enabler, but I think the technology has been taking over far too much in our lives nowadays. So our life has actually become quite inhuman, because the technology is now, we communicate through technology, we see through technology, our relationships are based on technology, and that takes away that whole human side which we are programmed to have in our lives. I understand that you guys are on the screen. My brain tells me that those are human beings there, but my brain hasn't evolved to see things in 2D. It understands the world in 3D. And of course, it needs to do quite some adjustments. If I sit here in front of the screen day in, day out, that's why it was, I think all of us, we felt like this online existence was so awfully tiring in the beginning of the pandemic, because it was exhausting to be looking at other people through the screen for 8 hours. I think we have adjusted that a little bit, but yeah, technology is good, but I think we are giving it far too much power, because we still need, we need those physical interactions with people. We need that attention exchange, that communication, which is with another human being. And we need that togetherness, not through screens and not through Zoom, but actually through physical existence, being with other people, being part of our pack, whatever the pack is. So I think we really have this huge danger that we are slipping into this technology enabled world, and we are losing that part of our life, which is absolutely essential to us as humans. And yeah, it's scary to see the young generation growing up with this world, which is technology based. And again, going back to my first talk, the young generation hasn't changed, their programming hasn't changed, but their world has now changed around them. And unless we educate them and say that, yes, this technology is good, but as a human being, you really need these other aspects in your life as well, I think it's only then they can start realizing that why are they potentially feeling so unwell, even if everything is okay in their lives. And it is because that humanity is kind of missing in their lives, if it makes sense. So that there, and going to COVID, I agree with what people said, that it's not all bad that it has brought to us. It has brought great many good things. I saw the business world, and just LinkedIn, I saw that world become much more human since the pandemic. People are talking about their struggles, and they are talking about being a human being. I think that's brilliant. And I have seen so many people, for the first time in their lives, they have actually opened their minds, their eyes to life, because they don't need to spend all the time commuting. hours and hours on end, you know, sitting in cars or buses or trains. They actually, for the first time, many of them, they have time to kind of stop and start looking at their own lives, spend time with kids, and just adjust and kind of assess that, you know, what's going on, what do I actually want from life? And I think that has been absolutely amazing kind of showstopper. It has stopped this madness, this rat race in so many respects. And I think we all needed that wake-up call, kind of, hey, let's stop and actually have a slightly different gear on. But of course, what now needs to happen is that we again need to help people to find the more meaningful way of living and more meaningful way of working as well. And I always say that even if we are made of the same stuff, we all have those same human needs. We all experience them totally differently. What I need is different from you. How I get happiness and mental well-being, it's most likely different from you, because we are all different human beings at the end of the day. And I think with the employers, the companies now, I think that's why I'm all about this human centricity, and let's understand what we humans actually are. Because what really, if we want to create this hybrid workplace, we really need to understand what works for each individual. You know, because again, I enjoy working from home because I have an active social life outside work. I get my human needs met kind of nicely through work and through private life. But then some people may not have that, which means that working from home permanently is really destructive to them, that they need that social interaction actually from work, so that again kind of keeps their cups full, so to speak. So I think it's there were lots of good things which COVID brought. There were loads of challenges it brought. Now we move forward. So yes, let's pick, you know, the best bits from both worlds, and most of all understand what we need to be well and what brings happiness, and then start adjusting the workplaces accordingly. Because I think that if you as a company owner, you really understand that people are your main asset, they are, because your business doesn't run without human beings. Otherwise you run a robotic something, and even then you need human beings who operate those. So humans are in the center of everything. And if you really understand that only a stressed brain is not a productive brain, so you need to create an environment where people are not stressed, where they are somewhat happy, where they have access to all their human intelligence. Of course you want to create that environment because you get the best out of your resources, and it's worth investing that time and money to actually start understanding who your people are and what they need to function. So yeah, it's we learn a lot from this time, and hopefully we learn the good stuff as well as the bad stuff, I would say.
Thanks, Sari. It's really interesting. As you say, there are some good things to take away from it, and we need to hang on to that. Yeah. So I've got another huge question. I always think there's a bit of a balance in terms of who is responsible for mental health and well-being. So we've got the state and governments, and they can put rules and regulations in place. We've got employers and the workplaces they create. And then there's also the individual and their responsibility. And I'm interested as to where you see the boundaries being in those responsibilities, and where that lies, and whether that does vary around the world. So, I mean, in terms of the state in this country, we've got the Equality Act of 2010, which protects people from discrimination and disability discrimination, and that can include mental health problems. But even then, there's very uneven access to treatment and resources. So you've got the legal framework, you've got what employers do, and you've got personal responsibility. And I'm just quite interested to see how people see that balance, I suppose. And I'm going to start with you on this one, Taffy. So over to you.
Yeah, no, that's a great topic, and one we in our business think about quite a lot. So from a point of view of societally, in Africa, in Zimbabwe, we call it Unu. And I think it's better known by the South African wording of it, which is Ubuntu. That idea of the individual being part of the collective, and really from a societal perspective in our culture, we don't really separate the individual and the collective. So that's the gold star from a societal perspective when we look at people with difficulties, people in need, and how we interact with each other. But unfortunately, the reality is that across those different stakeholders, there's going to be different capabilities and different stages along their journey of being able to act. So I think we need to consider, if we look at that 3-tier from the top of saying government, and then an employer, and then the individual, and saying across those tiers, where are we along the journey in terms of the resources, firstly, to be able to act, the understanding and awareness, to be able to take action, and then, of course, the benefit as a result of action being taken. And we, of course, regard South Africa as our initial market where we intend to launch. And the government does, or rather we are active already, the government does do as much as it can in the area of mental health. When I looked at, I think it was 2016 figures, it's about 615 million of that US dollars of healthcare budget was on public mental health, which I guess from a context of Africa is, it's not enough, but okay, it's a start. So we see that they're aiming for it, but when we look at the sort of second pillar, which is that awareness, if you drill into that spend, 86% of it is on inpatient care, which is sort of your last mile, your sort of your last, I wouldn't say last resort, but it's definitely a late stage intervention. And so, there's an opportunity to create understanding and improve the balancing of that spend. I think if we look at the US healthcare system, approximately 16% is on the inpatient aspect. So yeah, so there's definitely an awareness piece. So there's a motivation, but we need to work on awareness. Amongst employers, I think there's a case there from a point of view of having the resources to act, as well as having the benefit as a result of acting. So I think employers in a situation where the public healthcare system is perhaps still getting more up to speed on the topic, they become more pivotal because they're naturally more nimble and are more able to engage quickly in a conversation with someone like me, understand the issues and understand some of the proposed solutions, some of which come from us, and be able to say, okay, within the next 3 months, let's take action in some way. So employers become very pivotal. And when it comes down to individuals, of course, yes, there is, that's the person who we want to impact. So, so they matter a huge deal in this conversation. But there's going to be, more, in many cases, a challenge around the resources aspect, as well as, unfortunately, the awareness piece. And awareness in the sense of, yes, I'm aware that mental health exists, but taking that second step of how does it relate to me often needs a bit of a nudge. And so it really comes to, I think, the layers above to drive and be drivers of a lot of the change, between employers and governments. And I think in the African context, we're looking for employers to hopefully start to take more of a lead and lean in on some of their resources.
Excellent, thank you, Tafi. George, I'll move around to you next.
Thank you. Well, that was a very coherent answer. I took a lot from that. Really like the idea of the individual as part of the collective. I think it's interesting to consider that in this country, which may be seen as a more individualized society, and maybe there are more responsibilities seen on the individual as having to kind of look after their own well-being, maybe having more resources able to do that, but also respecting the fact that there are so many different determinants of whether one's well-being is good or not. And so a lot of those things will be out of the control of the individual, and that they won't be able to affect themselves. Yeah, I mean, I was similarly reflecting on the need for a kind of top-down approach and the need to be kind of leading by example. And you know, we've got this this first draft of the ISO 45003, which is the first psychological health and safety in the workplace directive, which is coming out in this country next year. Which is again, it's not mandatory, but it's giving a framework by which organisations can in a structured way approach the psychological health and safety of their employees, which is a very positive step, I think. Obviously, that in itself is a kind of cultural shift. We saw the shift in, say, health and safety itself, which again is now absolutely ubiquitous. Everybody understands the need for health and safety within the workplace. But that was, I remember growing up that everyone was always sort of tutting and rolling their eyes about health and safety and, oh, I can't believe we're having to do all these silly things. But now obviously it's taken such a central place into the safety of how people operate. And then in terms of employment, I think we are seeing an increase of a rise of the rhetoric around it's okay not to be okay, and of the need for leaders to stand up and to recognize or to stand up and to put their hand up and say, I have had mental health problems myself, and that being a kind of a trickle-down effect that demonstrates to all those within their organisation that it's okay to be talking about it. We're seeing a lot of rise in mental health, those qualified for mental health first aid, which is obviously a very positive thing. And then we've got the likes of Rob Stevenson and the Inside Out Leaderboard, which is all about leaders, recognising leaders who are standing up and putting their hand up in acknowledgement of their own issues that they've had. And then our own experience working with Martin Roberts, our biggest client pre-COVID, was a big Lloyds Banking Group, and the person that got us in there to work, he was very big on his story, and he was newly appointed as the mental health lead for this large bank, and the driver for him getting in post had been that he had the issues himself, and he kind of led by example in standing up and driving that agenda at the organisation. So I think, thinking about this top-down approach is really important, and increasingly will be in terms of where the responsibility lies.
Yeah, it's such a huge topic. But, Sari, have you got any thoughts on this?
Too many, I think. So I try to leave it, and thank you guys. It is an interesting one, and I'm not totally sure if we have time to talk about the cultural differences when it comes to mental health. But Taffy just brought up this one of the topics we discussed briefly in our briefing yesterday, and it's this: how different cultures support mental health differently, and how different cultures prevent people from staying well. And it is that social aspect which I really like, that individual is part of, because we are part of APAC. We still seek to be part of APAC, and that sort of society, it takes into account, it helps the PAC members. That's how it should be. We some of the cultures like in the UK and in Finland, we are very individualistic cultures where it's everybody for themselves almost, which of course creates these totally different challenges. But when it comes to who owns what, government, company, individual, I'm big on, I always cringe when we talk about this awareness, because I always think that, awareness is nothing unless you have the knowledge of how to start solving those problems. We have to stop shouting how bad the mental health problem is. We have to start giving solutions to people, not only just both individuals and organizations. And I go back to the same old. I'm like a broken record when I talk about that, how to create a life that works. We get our human needs met, how to create a workplace that works. We create conditions where everybody gets their human needs met. That's kind of that's the basis for it all. And in my ideal world, it would be a simple education to both the managers, the leaders in the company, and to all employees, so that they all have the same language. They understand what we need as human beings in order to be well. And individuals have to have responsibility for their own well-being. I mean, nobody can create, I need to look after myself, but I need to be given the knowledge and the tools to do it. And when it comes to workplaces, when it comes to mental health in a workplace, for example, I mean, it's when we create a workplace where people they feel safe to be themselves. They feel safe physically. We have the health and safety there, but they need to also feel safe psychologically, mentally. We have the diversity and all that kind of bringing good stuff there. But they need to feel they have some sort of control over the work they do. They need to feel they are respected and valued. They need to feel they have the competencies, the tools, skills, knowledge to do their job properly. And when they do a good job, it needs to be acknowledged, and the work needs to make sense to them. They know that they are needed in the company, and there needs to be this teamwork for them, around them, colleagues who support each other and managers who support, and they need to have that work-life balance. So they need some time off and time to think and reflect and relax and sleep. And when we create a workplace which has all those elements, simple common sense things, but we need to acknowledge them. We create a workplace where people are well. That brings the mental wellness, the well-being, at least in a workplace. Of course, it has a ripple effect to their personal lives as well. They are better at work, they are better at home, but also the other way around. If somebody is really distressed at home, they can't be doing their full potential at work. So then we need to enable them to give that knowledge for them to start changing their lives sufficiently, so that they actually become happier. And Taffy was talking about that cognitive side here. It's all about thinking differently and acting differently and getting these new different kind of perspectives. So I think it's yes, organizations, they definitely have a responsibility for creating those human-friendly organizations, workplaces. We have the diversity which is coming in. We have the mental health first aid, which is a brilliant thing. So they definitely have a role to play, but they are not responsible for people's mental health per se, because people are responsible for that themselves. But again, they need to be enabled. I can't really say about the government, because government does what government does. And I leave that to the governmental bodies, and I be politically correct here, trying to be. But I think everybody has a role to play, but we can only play our role when we have the proper knowledge. We know where the problems are coming from. We know what solves the problem, and we have the tools and the time. And I think when we start pushing kind of all fronts, I think we can change this world hugely. And I think the time is now really to change it and understand that, hey, we ain't machines. We are human beings, and we need to all be well to do our best in life and at work.
Kind of needs all sources to mesh together to produce something, and everybody play their part. Pete, last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, I'd endorse everything that's gone before in that. But the way I think it maybe helps me sometimes look at it, is to draw the parallel with non-mental health. So, as individuals, we are human beings. We look after our own space. We walk around. We do things. If we see a hole in front of us, it is not a wise thing to just keep walking and not walk round the hole and just fall into it. You will break a leg. It's not complicated. It's not and then you have a broken leg. You've got a broken leg, and then you've got a problem. So as an individual, you carry the responsibility in that sense to look after yourself and present yourself on a day-to-day basis, whether that's in your home or social life, whether it's at work, in a functional way. As employers, we have a responsibility to make sure that the hole that has appeared in the factory floor is dealt with, because if we don't, then we're going to impact somebody because they're going to fall into the hole and break the leg. And that's going to impact them, and it's going to impact us as a business. And so it comes into our risk register, and why would we not put a thing around the hole to stop people falling into it, then repair the hole, and then get back to normal? But you also have the government, and the government says, if you don't bother fixing the hole, Mr. Business, we are a legislative backup to that. We say, no, you have a responsibility for these people, and you need to fix that hole, and you need to take precautionary measures to make sure the hole doesn't have people falling into it. So there is in the non-mental health parallel, quite a clear distinction of duty, if you like, on the reactive side of the fence. The issue that makes this such a big one right now is, of course, in the world of mental health, we're not quite spotting the holes that exist, and we're not spotting the leg that gets broken until we're at the point of amputation. So actually, how do we deal with that inability to define those different stages and spaces? The government surely does carry an advisory and awareness role. You know, if you look back, if we, you know, for those of us of the right age and we're in the UK, we remember the AIDS campaign, you know, and the tombstones and the big heavy duty, you know, that was an example of government seeing something coming down the line that was a big health issue and reacting in a way that says this has to be dealt with, awareness has to be built up. But also, of course, funding the NHS in that instance to create the methodology of dealing with the problems as they occur. And I would observe, so I don't think there's any difference in terms of the split analysis roles, because I think at the end of the day, this is a health problem, whether it's a physical or a mental health, but it's a health problem. The problem we got is coming to terms with the fact that there is something there that none of us were really aware of. And then once awareness, because it's not just about awareness, we can shout about it from the rooftops, but if the problem's still happening, the problem's still happening. So it goes beyond awareness into resourcing and time and energy to help sort the problem out. And we all, the three units in that, the individual, the employer and the government, all have their role, and cannot any one of them act in isolation. If the employer does everything, but the human being still jumps over the fence and goes into the hole, says, "Oh, brother, I still broke my leg anyway," that cannot be the employer's problem. And if the government doesn't sort of fly the flag and say this has got to get dealt with, then you have an employer says, "Well, I'm sorry, but the person down the hole was just the person down the hole. We still made a profit, so everything's fine." That's not fine. So it's getting that understanding of this matter, which is a relatively new thing on the block, into the right places and managed in the right ways. That would be how I think, look at that split. And that's going to be different across cultures and continents and whatever as well.
I really love that analogy, Pete. I'm going to nick that for something. That's brilliant, because it's so spot on. And, you know, in a way, this dichotomy between physical health and mental health is false. It's not really they're not that different. You know, they're all intermeshed with each other, I think. So, and that's a really useful way of looking at it. I think probably that what we were going to move on to next was sort of already been touched on, but I am just going to still raise it. And if anybody's got something they want to say, just sort of have a bit of brief input. And that really is around the sort of stigma that there still is around mental health conditions, and the fact that people do feel differently about talking about mental health to their broken leg. And I think that's still the case in the UK. And from what I read and people I talk to, it's still much more the case in some Asian cultures, and I think possibly in some African cultures, Taffy. But and I think, you know, how can we act to break down that stigma? George has already used one of my favourite phrases, you know, is it okay to not be okay? And how do managers and leaders show enough vulnerability to get the conversation going, but still maintain some authority? And I think that's quite a fine balance for managers. You know, how do we tackle that stigma? How do we make it okay for people to talk about this stuff? So I'm going to start with you again, Taffy, just because I think it probably is a different perspective, and I think that would be quite interesting to hear.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting for me because I have experience on both sides of, I guess, many sides of this sort of global view. I did live in the UK for over 15 years and came into treatment in the UK initially. And what I found interesting was, I was coming from a point of view of not knowing anything about mental health, and through treatment becoming an advocate for mental health and shoving this link for the NHS services in everybody's face who I could. And that taught me a lot about how strong the stigma is, even in the UK, because I guess interacting with a lot of male friends and people who I know, some people would say, give me the link, but just so you know, it's not for me, it's for someone else. And that was a response that I had more than once, to my real surprise. And it made sense because, you know, I guess it's a global issue. But I think there is a stigma that is potentially stronger in Africa, just due to the timeline of the conversation around the topic of mental health being, I guess, slightly behind where it is in other places. So yeah, so I think we do see we do see a lot of stigma, and from a cultural perspective, it may be more in the sense of it's just not something that we talk about. My personal view on tackling stigma is, quite frankly, getting more people to take the first step in their own personal mental health journeys. I think is the most powerful thing, and then you end up with more people like me who came from being the embodiment of stigma itself to then telling people to use it, and then here I am on this conference and actually being on the solution side of the equation. So I think just getting more people to take that first step, because certainly for me, once I knew a little bit about mental health and what I was experiencing is actually XYZ, and it's quite normal and it can be resolved by that. I haven't even taken the steps towards resolving it, but just that piece of information has kind of like wheeled me in and got me to want more. So yeah, so I think certainly having more people entering into the cycle of their own personal journeys. And in the context of organizations, I think there's a lot to be said for managers going beyond being managers, and I'll put it this way: I've had a lot of managers, but I've had very few leaders, and there are very few people who I can point to say that person was a leader. They were actually very interested in the art of leadership and people. And I think it's very important for people who are in management to make that transition to leadership, for them to undertake some form of psychoeducation to understand mental health, to understand what are common signs and what are the common things that happen, so that they can understand their own employees better and take a more balanced view towards them. As just a quick example, one of the things that is very much taught within CBT is the idea of thinking errors, and just helping people to identify that when they have certain repetitive automatic thoughts, that they might be that they might be actually a thinking error, such as an all or nothing view, if something is all great or all bad. I think a manager having an understanding of those things and being able to identify them is going to be a better place to help and destigmatize. Yeah, so those are my views.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that whole point about educating people and, how do you start these conversations, and also knowing your limitations. I think I've talked to some people where, they've had some training put in place, and then some managers have overstepped the mark and they've been trying to sort of cure people and sort people out. But it's about recognizing signs, starting conversations, and signposting people to the right sort of sources of help, I think, isn't it? I wonder as well whether, in terms of stigma, whether there'll be a change generationally, just because younger people seem to be more open about these conversations and about opening up about the mental health. You look like you're about to spring in there, Pete, so I'm going to go to you next.
Well, I wasn't particularly. I was just agreeing with the mental, the generational thing, actually. There's an analogy, not necessarily around mental health, that I've seen used a few times, and that is we have a generation of digital natives growing up, anyone born after certain years, very much digital natives, and we have a generation of people who are very broadly can be phrased as the decision takers, who are maybe a little bit older, a little bit nearer the end of their career, in the mid of their career, and they're not digital natives. They haven't grown up, and it's something we alluded to earlier. But those decision takers are trying to take decisions that affect the whole of society, as well as businesses and government and politics and all the rest of it, on behalf of the younger generation, the digital native generation growing up. And Brexit was a great example of that dialogue. We saw it as the UK, the decision takers were one piece, the retired people were one piece, and the younger people were saying, hang on a minute, this affects us. So you end up with this bizarre situation where the decision-taking group of people are trying to look through a lens on behalf of a younger generation and make decisions as best they can, looking through that lens. But they have the life experience. So there's an element of argument that says, well, yes, okay, that's not a bad asset to have when you're taking those big decisions about how a society moves. But how can you possibly look through the lens? And these youngsters the younger generation saying, whoa, what about this, what about that? But they don't have the life experience. So actually, how do we as a society make that balance that ends up being the right thing to do? And actually your point there about a younger generation coming through who are digital natives, who are more open, that's one of the upsides and downsides obviously of digital comms, but there's a lot more openness. We have self-esteem issues in teenagers in a much bigger, or at least more open way. It's not to say they didn't exist before, but they're certainly now more on the table, and hopefully we're addressing them. Sometimes it goes wrong. But that generation is coming through. And so, yes, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure there will be a generational change as that generation grows up. I'd agree.
George, have you got any thoughts to add to this one?
I mean, I'm not sure if I do really. I think no, I'm gonna pass over. I think we've had some really good thoughts on this question already from some of our panelists. Sorry, you got anything you'd like to add?
I was thinking about what was the question. There have been so many topics being
talking about breaking down stigma and
yes, brilliant.
Leaders and managers and so
yeah.
on.
Yes. Something came to my mind when Pete, when you said this, how do we utilize the new approach, new outlook from the young generation and the experience from the old generation, and that of course is diversity and inclusion, that we actually create workplaces where we give a chance to all views, and also in society, in the government, that's what the diversity is all about, that you acknowledge that we are all different, we come with different resources and experiences, and then you enable all those views to be kind of bundled, to be utilized. So I guess that would be ideally that we use the older generation for certain aspects, and the younger generation to actually bring those things, what they need, what they have realized. And for me, I have the same sort of background as Taffy has. I suffered from severe depression over a decade ago. It was part of a post-burnout existence, and that event brought me into this concept that I'm now bringing to world and bringing to the workplaces, whereby when I'll have a life that works, when I get all my human needs met, I'm not depressed. And that was exactly what happened to me, is that I didn't understand where my depression came from. I didn't understand what was happening to me. There were no particular reasons for me to end up so severely depressed. But then I was being told this concept, this framework of human needs, and I checked it out and I thought it's no brainer. Of course, I'm not well because I didn't have a life that worked. I didn't have any sense of achievement in my life because I was a lady of leisure. I was on sabbatical. I didn't need to work. I didn't have a reason to wake up because I didn't work. I was just enjoying life. I wasn't part of anything because I was just taking time off, and I kind of ticked all the boxes. And for me, it was plainly simple process, like, oh my heavens, now I know what has happened to me, why I feel so bad. And also I started to understand why my head was such. Why did I have this catastrophic thinking, the black and white thinking? Why couldn't I think straight? Why couldn't I concentrate? Why couldn't I see actually, I was so fused and I couldn't deal with people. And once I was explained that, your brain is in a state where you don't have access to that ability, you become polarized because the brain is in that constant survival mode. So you think about, it's going to kill me or it's not going to kill me. It's bad or it's good. It's all these extremes. And suddenly everything made sense to me. And I thought, my heavens, there were reasons why I ended up having that mental problem. I knew what caused it. And now I knew how I'm going to get out of it. And I generally got out of that. And of course, when we are in that sort of state in our brain, we can't think straight. We can't think logically. We need to get out of that state. And then we need to realize that it's that chicken and the egg problem, that partly why did I end up being like that was that my thinking was a bit wrong. And I didn't quite, appreciate the human connections that I do now and all these things. But it was this simple education that was given to me. And I saw the light and I realized why I ended up being in that state. What can I do now myself to actually get out of it? And not only that, this knowledge that was given to me now enables me to maintain my own mental well-being all the time. because I know what I need to be well, and it's those human needs. It's all that simple stuff. And there is no stigma in us. When you understand the kind of almost like the science behind this all, there is no stigma, because any one of us, we can end up in that state when we don't get those things into our lives that we need as human beings. Absolutely every one of us. We all have different kind of abilities to survive in life. But then again, we all are different. We all are strong in some aspect and we are weaker in some aspect. But again, it's this, for me, the whole thing, how do we get the stigma out? We don't get the stigma out by saying how big the problem is. No, it just makes it worse. We get the stigma out when we really give knowledge to people, saying that this is how it happens, this is how you can get out of it. And Tafi mentioned the solution. You are part of the solution now, and I want to be part of the solution. And the solution is that, yes, we can get over anxiety. I have done it. We can get over depression. I have done it. And everything is doable. But we need to, again, have the right information around, which really kind of normalizes the whole thing. It is as normal as breaking a leg, or it's as normal as whatever else. And I think that's where it all comes to. And the solution, talk about the solutions all the time, just bring that to the picture, because they are resolvable. They are much more manageable problems than cancer, for example. And and there is a way out. I always tell people that, regardless of how bad your situation is now, regardless of how awful you feel, but please believe me, there is a way out, and there absolutely is a way out, for all of us. So I think we need to change the approach how we talk about this whole thing, I think. And that really brings the kind of the more positive approach to this whole thing, instead of the doom and gloom that I hear, in all medias nowadays. But yeah, that was my take.
Sorry, I've got my hand on the wrong computer mouse there. And it's a really good point there, Sari. And I think the other way to sort of look at it is we've all got mental health. It's a spectrum. It's not as if people have either got good mental health or bad mental health. We've all got mental health, and it doesn't stay constant, and it changes with time. I am really conscious of time moving on, because we've all had so much to say. So I'm going to try and combine the next couple of questions into one. And it's another biggie, but we're going to have to try and keep it fairly brief, I think. And that's really, how do we get businesses to really understand the value in investing in mental health and well-being for their teams? And that relates to sort of almost how do we measure well-being? What is well-being? Why should businesses invest in it? Why, and if they are going to invest in mental well-being, what should they be looking at? And one of the things that always really irritates me is when I say, oh yes, we're doing well-being, we've got a yoga class and some apples, and it's like, you've got to get those fundamentals of people's working conditions and their autonomy and their sense of being part of something. To me, those things are really important. The other stuff is fantastic when you've got the fundamentals right. And it kind of also relates to this, it was meant to be a separate question, but I'm going to chuck it all in together. What do you think is the role of the arts and culture in mental well-being in the workplace? Does it have a place? And having launched that question, I'm going to start with you, George, obviously, because I know you're going to have some thoughts on that one.
Yes, thank you. Well, that is a big topic, but obviously it's something that we've really thought about a lot along the way. Part of our journey has been, I initially thought that when we were working, offering our services, we were kind of operating in a double niche. We started off with in well-being, which at the time, 5 or 6 years ago, was kind of not quite as well regarded as it is now. And then you've got the slightly more holistic, artistic-based approach that we had. So we think a lot about how to make the case to organizations about why they should be investing in activities such as ours, as much as looking more broadly at documenting impact in such a way that can ultimately be played out to cost saving. I mean, it's for organizations, there are different approaches and different drivers. There are different ways of measuring well-being, and there's different frameworks, the Edinburgh Warwick and the ONS and the What Works Well-being, and organizations can kind of assimilate these all into a different way, looking at kind of subjective, hard and soft measurements. Ultimately, there's not even really a defined, definition for well-being almost. it's being your best self. You know, I think that's something along the lines of how the World Health Organization describes it. But it's, you know, I think it's a step-by-step approach in looking at, you know, obviously there are different elements that impact people's well-being. You know, if you have a dangerous workplace, if people's working conditions, people's lives are you know, adversely affected by their work, you're not going to go and prescribe them a workplace choir, for example. However, yoga has its place. You know, even giving people fruit has its place. It's by no means a silver bullet, but all these things have their place. And if we take a data-driven approach, then we can really understand how different initiatives can impact different groups, different demographics, different locations in different ways, and these things can be effectively implemented. So that's kind of the way we've been looking at things, understanding from a qualitative as much as from a quantitative approach, looking at really documenting in a way that people can see the return on investment, because it's still seen as a cost rather than an essential investment, despite the fact that we know that, you know, 45 billion per year, whatever is the cost that organizations are seeing. So that's all part of the shift. And I suppose, yeah, briefly moving on to the second point, you know, I come from a cultural and arts background. So we do a lot of advocating, particularly for looking at what we do as a real benefit to supporting mental health and well-being. You know, what we do, and the arts and cultural approaches often are kind of putting people in a different mindset, approaching problems in different ways, conceiving things in different ways, putting people in, say, a flow state. You know, when you sing, you are juggling pitch and tempo and rhythm, dynamic and lyrics. And you try and think about your Slack channel that's pinging you away, or your email list, because you can't. You are taken out to a different headspace, and you are putting yourself in a zone which is lowering your cortisol level, relaxing your vagus nerve, giving your body an opportunity to switch off and unwind. And with our always on world, I think that kind of thing is really important. And just to say that, yeah, I mean, we've been thinking a lot about this because we were supported by the Arts Council with a Cultural Recovery Fund grant. We've had this HUM program, and we've been thinking a lot about how we transition, how we take what we've learned over the last 18 months. And so we're looking at social prescribing as the direction where that's going to go. Social prescribing is looking at kind of non-medical interventions and to mental ill health particularly. All GP practices as of next year are going to have a social prescribing link worker, because there's this fantastically mind-bending statistic that 40%, they estimate, of GP visits are for non-medical reasons that can be socially solved. So that in itself is just a huge indicator of how we need to hugely be reconceiving how we're approaching mental ill health. And I think the arts and culture, as much as having a more data-driven understanding of the ways that we can impact change, will all play into that.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and the sort of social prescribing thing is definitely going to just grow and grow, I think, and that can encompass everything, can't it, from walking groups and the arts and things like that. I think it's really interesting, and it goes back actually to Sari and human connection and the sorts of things you've been talking about. So I'll move to you next. You know, your thoughts about how do we convince businesses that this is important, and what should they be doing?
Well, you know, there are two very simple measures all companies should have in place already today. How much are your people off sick? How many days are they off sick? And how many people leave your company? If you don't know those, I don't know how you are running your business. So basically, if your guys are off sick awfully a lot, if you are doing your job so that you understand actually who your people are, and you can have conversations that, okay, what's up? Are you okay? You know if it's potentially stress related or workplace related. And if you see that lots of people are leaving your company, obviously there is something wrong. So what makes people sick? Well, it can be their personal life, their work life, their physical existence. So it's much larger aspect. But what makes people leave? Well, obviously people leave a workplace because they don't like some aspects of that work. So I'm not a big fan of statistics, because I just live in the real world, and I said that if you don't see those problems in front of you, you know, there's a bit of a problem for you. But if people leave the company, it's often, it has been said that it's the manager. People don't leave jobs, they leave managers. Well, if you believe in that, so then, yeah, why don't they like the manager? What are the conditions? What are the aspects of their work experience that they don't like? What are the aspects that make them leave? You start looking at that concept, and it's all about this well-being, happiness at work. That's one indicator. You change things at work, you create a workplace where people are happier, where they can get their human needs met. Broken record again. But you know, that's how you create the workplaces. They are safe, they are respectful, there is a teamwork, people have the skills they need to do their job. The job is meaningful. You create those conditions, and it's very likely that the people don't leave anymore because they like the place. And it's very likely that actually they don't take the duvet days so many times because they are actually happy to go to work. They are happy to do their work. So those are the two very, very kind of simple reasons. And again, how do we get employees to realize the importance or the value of their employees and the value that employees are well? Well, again, you educate them. You tell them that what is the neuroscience behind, you know, stressed brain is not the productive brain. What happens in the brain if we are under any strong emotion? The brain changes the way it works. The middle part of the brain hijacks the system and it disconnects the human, the higher functioning, which are those, our logic, our rational mind, our imagination, our rapport building, all those amazing things that we humans can do. If your people are unwell, if they are unhappy, if they are stressed out, anxious or depressed, they can't access all those human abilities. And to me, again, it's like how much clearer can I explain this thing before you get it? Because it's like, if people are not well, you don't get the best out of your people. And I think that really is the crux of it all. And we go back to whose responsibility is it, you know, to make sure that people are well. Well, there are certain responsibilities you take as an employer or as the company employing those people. And you can extend that responsibility by giving people that education and those tools. What I try to do so desperately, or not desperately, but, you know, so passionately with companies, educate the managers, help the managers to actually see those things, and help the managers to really kind of enable their people, not manage their people, but enable them to do the best job they can. It's all that. And yeah, we humans, we have these physical needs, physical aspect, and we have the psychological aspect. And when it comes to, for example, the work that George does, that's exactly what when he prescribed that, you know, it's giving people the different headspace, that environment where their cognitive functionality is working on something else than the work stuff, which is stressful, and they get the distance from the work stuff, and their brain relaxes, they relax, and they have much more capacity than when they go back to work. So it's all good, and I don't dismiss yoga at all, nor fresh fruit, but they are just tiny little aspects. And what I always keep saying, I said that, you know, it really is that no matter how human-centric, how well designed your office is, or how much fresh fruit your company gives, or how much green tea there is, all good stuff, you know, on their own, or how many yoga sessions your company provides you, or how many times you go for a run on a day-to-day basis. None of that brings long-lasting, sustainable well-being if your work environment, for example, is such that your psychological triggers are being, you know, kicked off all the time, and the stress is constantly with you, in you when you work. So everything is, they all have a place, but unless the fundamentals change, those are just kind of, we are just patching up the problem. We are not actually, you know, addressing the root cause, which is how do we create those workplaces which constantly give us everything that we need as human beings. So yeah, that was me again. I said too much, too long. Apologies for that.
Not at all. No, it's all interesting stuff, and I absolutely agree with what you've said. I'm very conscious of time. I'm going to just pass over very quickly to Taffy for some closing comments, and then to you, Pete. But I guess we have to wind this up, don't we? Because we are out of time.
We are.
Taffy, if you've got some final thoughts.
Yeah, sure. No, I co-sign everything that was said. On the arts front, I went to the website of OnSong, as I did go to all of your websites. I am that guy. And absolutely amazing. And I think definitely there's a lot to be said for putting people in that present state. And 30 minutes spent doing that choir activity, I'm confident will give you 3 hours of high quality productivity time afterwards. So all for that. I think another one is just around data. First is to adopt a mix of tools, some of them that do include scoring and give you some data on your own population. That's one of the things that we do through our digital therapeutic platform, and how the user interacts with it, that creates data that you now know of. But I think there's also a bit about employers that don't have their own data being more trusting of the very good research that's coming out. So if you don't have your own data, trust the data that's out there. And Deloitte did do a very good report that I guess quite a lot of people in the space know in January 2020. Which was called the Mental Health and Employers, Refreshing the Case for Investment. And that has a ton of information in there. It has estimates around absenteeism, presenteeism, impacts, and it basically creates that use case for employers to know that there's a 600% ROI from taking action at the awareness stage, 500% ROI from proactive intervention, and 300% ROI from late intervention. So all are great ROIs, but that's the information that is available and can be used. And lastly, I would just say, we're all, I guess, in a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's how employers need to be when they look at this area of mental health. They need to think of it as a lean methodology. What is the cost really of going to a OnSong and saying, we want to try this for 2 weeks to a month, and then get the feedback, and then you decide if you go on, rather than deliberating for months and months. I think employers should just be open to just saying, hey, what is the cost of a Vimbo? How much is it for 1 month? Let's just do it. So I think there has to be that element of experiment and find out through real action, as opposed to just deliberating.
Totally agree, Taffy. I have to say that's very much a thought process that I've had recently when trying to engage with HR and leaders and trying to get them to instigate these things. That actually at this earlier stage, we have to see people instigating it as entrepreneurs, people instigating it within organizations as entrepreneurs, and having to really they need that resilience and drive as much as the vision, and they need to be enabled to do it.
Exactly.
Very much the mindset we've been thinking recently.
Fantastic.
That's a really positive way to come to a close, unless you've got something else to add there, Pete. Because
two very quick things, one on each, and hopefully I'll keep them very tight. I think there's no question in my mind, and I think in the broad culture, if you think about people, that culture and the arts are critical. If you imagine a world without culture and the arts, it's a pretty grim place. So you come back to where we are now, the more we can put into it, the better the results will be. So I think that's that on that front. The other one I would say is in terms of how we achieve this, I think we have to remember that 83%, I think, of the UK businesses that exist are micro and small SME businesses. Those businesses struggle with management time, because you have owner operators for whom, time spent thinking what may be good thoughts is time away from profitability and the rest of it. So where we're talking about corporates and where we're talking about businesses with management structures and management time, then I think everything we've said about, the engaging cultures, looking at the data, looking at the stats, works, and it's an education process that is there to be dealt with. But 83% of the companies are in a place where they're not that structured, and that is a vast majority of the employed population. And I struggle to see, I think a lot of those employers, a lot of those business owners would heartily agree, appreciate and applaud, but their next reaction would be, how on earth do I deal with that in my world? I don't have the capacity to do that space, to take people off the production line to do this. So I think in the end, conjecture, there needs to be some subsidized, governmentally delivered capability that allows those business spaces to say, look, this isn't going to hit your bottom line because we recognize you're working very hard to achieve survivability, let alone anything else, but it is going to improve the space. It's going to be something you can bring to the There you go. That's my closing thought.
I absolutely agree with that, and it's something that I do try and highlight that, even in terms of, you know, helping disabled people into employment and things like that. Smaller micro businesses need some help with that. They need some help with this.
They do. They do.
There's a whole other topic there for another show, Pete.
There is. There is. There is.
Thank you so much to everybody. It's been amazing. Your contributions have just been so interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the recording as well. And well, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Shall we take
Thank
the
you.
picture? Did you take the picture already?
I have taken a couple, but I haven't got one of
Oh,
everyone
yeah.
waving or anything like that.
You know, we like waving, don't we?
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.